Hello Internet, AdoptedMike here, and in this video I'm going to be building a NAS, or Networked Attached Storage. Basically just a little box that you can load up with hard drives and stick in a corner somewhere, whether you want it to be a media server or a backup device or just to a file server in general. So the case I'm using here is the DS380 from SilverStone. So this is a small form factor chassis, as you can tell, that will be using an ITX motherboard. The motherboard I'm going to be using is the ASRock H61MV-ITX, which is obviously an ITX motherboard, socket 1155. The processor I'm going to be putting in is the Celeron 465, which is a single core Celeron that is hyper-threaded, so we'll have two logical cores. The RAID card that I'm using down there, you can see, is an Areca RAID card, and it's the ARC1222 SAS. So it will run up to 8 SAS or SATA hard drives. So that'll be perfect, being that that case will allow for 8 hard drives or hot swappable hard drives in the front. Then over to the right there, you can see the power supply I'm using is an SFX power supply from SilverStone with 300 watts of power. And then just for show, I've got a WD 2TB red there that I'll show how the Caddies work for installing hard drives into them. And then anyway, I guess you can also see next to the processor there, I have the stock heatsink and fan combination, being that it's not going to get very hot, so we don't need to have any kind of funny cooling or ridiculous cooling on that little Celeron processor. Now for the operating system, I prefer to use a solid state storage device for that, and we come up with some different options here. At the far right, you can see I've got a Samsung SSD, so that's an option, especially if you're using like a Windows based operating system. You're going to need something like that. For Linux based or other operating systems that are easier on resources, and you could probably get by maybe with like a 16GB flash drive there, and then I've got a little conversion to go from the internal USB to a external USB, like so that way it would switch over, and then you can have that dongle and the drive inside of the case and you'd never see it, so you could boot off of it and away you would go. And then obviously then the hard drives would be your storage partitions. Or I guess I've got this 2.5-inch SATA to compact flash drive there as well, so you could use a compact flash card, and then convert it over to SATA for the operating system as well too. So there's a couple of different options depending on, like I said, what OS you're going to use. You may want to use a faster solid state drive for like Windows, but then some of the lower overhead you could get by with compact flash or USB. And then another category that we're going to end up with some options is the RAM, and that's mostly going to be on the size of the RAM. Depending on the operating system again, and also depending on how much storage space that you're going to have, you're going to want more or less RAM. In this particular case here for show, I've got two 2GB sticks for 4GB total, but you may actually want to go to 8 or 16, like I said, depending on what RAID you're running and how many drives, the operating system, and all of those things combined, you might want more RAM. So that's another one that you've got a couple of choices on. And now I'm going to go ahead and take everything away, and then we're going to get to the highlight of this build, which is that SilverStone case. So we'll spin it around and we'll take a good look at it and see what it has to offer. So here are the accessories that are included in the case. We'll go ahead and start with them. For starters, we obviously have a manual. It's pretty detailed. It's pretty good. I read through it a little bit before I started this assembly, so I could kind of familiarize myself with how this is going to work, because this is kind of it's a little bit different of a case. It is. We also get some screws for everything that you need there for the hard drive and motherboards, SSDs, whatever. We get stickers. And basically these stickers are just going to go on front of the drive caddies, which I'll show you in a little bit, and then you could just label the drive caddies should you want to. Then we have a key here that unlocks the side door, or the front door rather, from the side. I'll show you that in a little bit. This does feel kind of cheap, and I do feel like this could easily break off. I did use it to unlock and lock the door, and it definitely feels kind of flimsy. So I would like to see this be metal. Would have been a lot better, especially since the lock is metal. So you got this plastic piece going into a metal lock. But anyway, continue on. We got a cable tie down that has sticky tape on the back to tie it, or to tape it to somewhere in the case, and then you can clamp some cables down. And then try to get this, got a lighting issue here, but anyway, these three pieces here are more for the case. Has this optional video card mount. It can take longer video cards than what normally would fit in a micro ITX case. So basically you lose one of the drives. I think it's the third drive from the top, and then you use this to plug the drive hole, because you won't be able to use the Caddy, and then you swap this bracket in to or swap it with the bracket that's already installed, and then you use this rubber piece here, and then you have a video card mount. And I'll show that later as we get into the case itself. And then we also have a little badge here, not kind of a badge, but it's a piece of plastic with the SilverStone logo, and the power button goes through here, and then there's a little hole there for the LED light, and it has a tape for it, and that basically would stick on to, ooh, come on tripod, there we go. That basically would stick on to right here with that included tape, and depending on if you wanted that or not, that's just kind of an optional thing as well too. I think it's pretty cool that they included it in a way that you don't necessarily have to have it. So anyway, now let's focus more on the case itself. Okay, so here we will start with the front of the case. We've got the brushed aluminum here, and the rest of it up here is all plastic around into here, so it doesn't really color match well, but that's okay. And then for the side panels, these actually feel more like steel. And then we have obviously steel in the back, steel on the sides, and on this back here we've got a removable dust filter. It's got some mesh in there that at least it should be easy to clean just by pulling it off. It's magnetic, so that works out good. And we have a couple of included fans, and they are obviously intaking air. And then back to the front again. So we have a power button here. As you can see, there's a little LED light there, and here's where we come to the part about the key. So basically you have your key here, and then there's a key hole, and you put it in there, and you are able to lock it, which I have now, and then back here to unlock that front door. And where I think it's going to be a break hazard is, for example, if you didn't test it first and know that it was locked, and you thought you wanted to lock it, I think you could easily just snap that thing right off attempting to lock it. So you have to be very careful and know the actual open or close, well, know rather if the door is already locked. So there we are to unlock it, and now we'll open it up and take a look at the inside here. And then we can see, first of all, the 8 drive caddies here, and you can see with those little stickers that I showed you before. And then on this side panel, or not, I guess this front panel here that's now on the side, by moving this, you can, this little lever here, you can block out that LED light, which is right here. That will allow you to darken it so you won't be able to see it, or you can kind of, it does come up, there you go, and then you'd be able to see the light out of the front. So that's kind of handy if you don't want to have that whatever color, I'm not sure what color it is yet, but if you don't want that light shining through, that would be actually kind of nice. And then also too, you have the option, if you slide this over, then the front power button does not press anymore. So this way, if you had it locked, no one could shut it off. So that's good. Or you can pull it back and then have operation of the power button. We also have a reset button there as well too, 2 USB 3s, and for some odd reason we have a front audio, which is kind of weird to have on a case like this, but I suppose if you were using it as a gaming case, which it can be used, I don't recommend it, then you may or may not want those, but I still think, I mean, you close that door, you won't have access to them anyway, and in my opinion, on a micro ITX case, or micro ITX case, you're not that far away from the rear panel, unless it was in a corner or something, but anyway, we'll continue to move on. So, We've got our drive caddies here. They just pull out like so, and then a hard drive, which I will pop a hard drive out real quick. There we are, would basically just get installed, and then it is not toolless, so you'll have to screw the hard drive in, and then you'll be in the caddy. It'll also support 2.5-inch drives as well too, as you can tell with the screw holes in the bottom. And then from here you would just slide it in, it would catch, and then it would lock to the backplane, because there actually is a backplane in this particular device, which we'll get to a little bit later. So that's how the hard drive mounting system works. So all 8 of these things obviously will come out, and then the reason this is segmented here is because this is where you would install that cover plate if you had a longer graphics card. It would actually, there's some room back here we can see later, but a graphics card, this piece here would pop out, and that holder would go in, and then the graphics card would just slide all the way through, and then you just lose this one bay for a graphics card. But anyway, we'll get to that later. So continuing on, we will remove these. Oop. And now we can get a good look at the backplane there itself. So this is all metal, and these are entirely plastic, but I guess they do have, well, nope, that's plastic there as well too. So yeah, even this side thing, it just is to carry the activity LED. It's just a clear piece of plastic, and obviously the activity LED would be here, and then it would just transmit it all the way to there, so you'd see activity on that particular drive. So that is kind of what we've got going here on the outside. We can spin it around one more time. We'll take a look at the rear. We have an exhausting 120mm fan there, and obviously we've got our 2 PCI slot brackets, a little bit of ventilation up here. The power supply gets installed, and as I mentioned before, it's a small form factor SFX power supply. And then on the top there's also another removable dust filter for the power supply. So this is designed for the power supply, obviously, to pull air from the top and then into the supply and then exhaust it out the back. So another magnetic dust filter there is much appreciated. And we'll also notice too that this particular side is not removable, it's riveted in, and this side is just screwed in. So we'll take off this panel next, and then we'll start, I'll get some of this stuff out of the way, and then we'll start taking a look at the internals. So that comes off quite easily, and this is actually a pretty thick piece of metal. It doesn't bend very well. It feels very, I mean, it flexes a little bit, but not too bad. It feels very rigid compared to some of the other cases I've played with in the past. Of course, this is a more expensive case anyway, so but anyway, moving on. Here we take a look at the inside, and you can start to see how it's could be difficult to work with, but this entire drive cage is removable, and as is this one as well too. So in the instruction manual, obviously it has you removing both of those to get in there to work on the board itself. And we can also remove the front panel here if you wanted to as well too. There's some screws here, and that would help remove this entire piece of front panel if you needed to do even more work. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by removing this backplane cage, and we'll take a closer look at it. Okay, so for the 2.5-inch drive mount up here, there's 4 screws. There's 1, 2, and then 3 and 4 up top, and then this comes out, and you can see here that it will hold up to 3 2.5-inch drives. And yeah, it's actually a pretty sturdy construction as well too, this steel is, so it feels really good. And then for this, the bigger one, there were 2 screws, and then 2 screws on the bottom going up to be able to remove this out, and then it just kind of slides out there like I did. And now we'll take a look. Scoot this case over a bit on my little Lazy Susan. Okay, we'll take a look at the back, and let's see if I get a little closer. So what we have here is we have SATA and SAS depending on what kind of drives you're using. The SAS is on the left and the SATA is on the right, so if you're using SATA drives, you would want to use the data cables all along the right hand side. And then we've got some power connectors here too. There's 2 Molex power connectors to power all of the drives, and as you can see too, there's also capacitors, which is nice, so that should help when you have 8 drives trying to spin up at the same time. The capacitors will definitely help even that out a little bit to where you don't have any kind of unnecessary strain on anything else like the drives or the power supply itself. And then we also too have some fan headers here, and those fan headers actually are to power the fans that are mounted in the side there in the back. So with this mess of cabling here anyway, there's 2 of these obviously for the 2 fans, and those are actually meant to plug into the back plane there and then power those fans, which, I mean, I don't know necessarily why. I doubt they're temperature controlled 3 pins. I mean, I'm sure they're just going to run it at a solid 12 volts the whole time, but I guess it is kind of handy rather than having to, well, of course, I guess the idea here too, now that I think about it, probably most ITX motherboards, they generally don't have a lot of fan headers, so the fact that this has 2 right there, it takes the strain off of having to fill up all of your motherboard headers first of all, or having a bunch of splitters or anything like that. So anyway, I guess now that I think about it, that probably does make more sense. So here we are. We'll take a look at the front of it as well too, like we had before. Here's the side there. If you remove these screws, you can install that other bracket that lays down flat, and then it will allow the video card to come through here and then rest down on that piece of rubber that is included as well too. So for the purpose of this build, I'm not going to be removing this, just I wanted to show you guys how that would work. This comes out, the other one goes in, and boom, now you can have a longer GPU in there, which for this I don't think makes sense, so that's why I'm not going to mess with it. One thing to think about too is to be careful with these capacitors on the back when you're handling this, because obviously these are gonna break off if you're not very careful. I would have liked to seen better capacitors on there, maybe solid state ones, but this will do if you're careful with it, and you definitely don't want to go dropping it or anything like that, because it probably will break the caps off and then you're going to be having to get the soldering gun out. Okay, so we've got that out of the way, and now let's move on to the internals. So what we have here anyway, you can tell, is we have all these wires doing everything that we need them to do. We've got all these fan headers to power the fans. I wish they were sleeved, but this isn't the kind of build that you're going to necessarily want to show off, so I mean, other than having the wires able to spread out a lot and make more cable clutter. But zip ties can, you know, you can zip tie here and zip tie here and along the way to tighten the cables up, or you could sleeve them yourself. So it's not horrible. These fans appear to be nice fans as well too. They're the ones with the little dimples on the blades, so hopefully that actually makes them a little more quiet. It's supposed to, so I think that's kind of cool. And then for the rest of the things, it's just a USB 3 cable. We've got a front panel audio, which I shared my thoughts on that earlier. And then we have a reset switch, power switch, and then we've got power LED, hard drive LED, activity lights. So yeah, so we got all that, and that's all routing up back here into that connection, which actually can be removed if you needed to remove it for any kind of modding. So we've got the case all torn apart anyway, and now it's time to actually start putting a system in this. So yeah, I mean, I can't see anything else that I particularly want to change. If you wanted to change fans, you could obviously change fans, but I feel like for my purposes, I'm ready to get on with the build. So now you can see I've got most of my cable management going on, and I've got most of the hardware installed as well too. I felt this was a good stopping point to start recording, a stopping point in the assembly anyway. I've got a lot of zip ties. I went kind of hog wild on it, but I decided that once I put that RAID card in, there's going to be a whole nother octopus of cables, and as much as I can do to tie things down, or in this case keep the wires closer together so they don't just get all mangled and tangled all over the place, the better off I'll definitely be. And then down here you can see as well too, I've got those tucked up underneath, and basically I'm just getting ready because I realized there's going to be a lot of cables when I start putting the 8 SAS cables in for the backplane. So I just wanted to stop at this point and show where we're at. Obviously I've got this. I'm going to leave this out for now because I'm going to need a cable, or a SATA cable, in order to power whatever I end up putting up here in that drive cage. So I'll need that, and then this other one I've actually got the Molexes ready to plug into the back plane of the hard drive caddy. So this is where we're at now, and I'm going to go ahead and put the RAID card in, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I mean by an octopus of cables. Also too, I'll have a single SATA cable that's going to go from the motherboard up to here for the SSD that I use for the operating system. So basically I'll have the operating system, and then I'll have, you know, the RAID card controlling all 8 of the hot swap drive bays. Also too, this would be the time if you were going to put your operating system on a flash drive, this would be the time that you would want to do that with this adapter, because pretty soon when you start putting more stuff in, it's going to be very difficult to access down here to the or depending on any motherboard, it's going to start to get difficult to access that USB 2.0 connection up here. It's going to be hard to get that in and then secure that as well too. So that'd be good, because once you start putting these caddies back in, or the backplane for that matter, I meant, it's going to start to get pretty difficult to do anything else with it. So anyway, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and get to the RAID card. So installing the RAID card is fairly simple. There's 3 screws. You unscrew these 3 screws, and then this particular little bracket here, it comes off. You put your card in, and then you obviously, this thing is going to try to fall out as well too, the filler. And then when you get the card in, then you put the screws back in, tighten them down, and then so this kind of secures it really well. In fact, it feels like a very strong connection. So even if the heavy graphics card, there would definitely be a lot of support starting back here at the bracket, even though it is mounted externally and not internally, like on other cases, as you can see. So there is the RAID card, and I've got the 2 ports at the back for the fan out cables. And one thing I wanted to point out, and this could be a preference thing, but I will try to take a look and confirm it with temperatures. If that RAID card gets hot, and it does have a built-in fan, I might install one of those PCI bracket fans, you know, that exhaust air out the back, you know, so that should help cool the RAID card if I even need it. I really don't think I will, just because the heat's gonna rise anyway, and with these fans blowing in, I think there's gonna be enough airflow for it. But it is one thing to think about, because there still is enough room to mount a fan back here to exhaust some hot air out, depending on the RAID that you're running as well too. Like a RAID 5 or RAID 6, you know, it stresses the CPU on the RAID card a little more, and it will generate heat. A RAID 0 or RAID 1 isn't nearly as stressful, so it doesn't generate nearly as much heat, but it is one thing to think about if you have a temperature issue. Or in this particular case as well too, some of these have a battery backup option, and then that would also get installed in this second slot as well too, if it had the battery backup option. Or I guess alternatively you could put the battery somewhere else. But anyway, me rambling about the features of the RAID card isn't necessarily what this build is about, but I just wanted to throw a couple of those ideas out there to think about if you are going to use a RAID card in this case. Because once again, once we start putting the drive cage back in, it's going to be very difficult to change without removing everything. And now here is our octopus of cables. So now we can see where it really is going to start to get a little tight to work around. All I can say is thank God we're able to use the 2 Molex connectors and not have to have 8 SATA connectors to power the 8 drives, because the data cables alone are quite a bit. Possibly too, you could get shorter of these fan out cables as well too, so that's one other thing to think about. This is just what I ended up having on hand, so I'm going to go ahead and attempt to work with that. So now we got everything installed, all the cables installed, everything's kind of laying out as it needs to be, and I'm going to start reassembling the drive caddies and the drive cage. Well, I hit my first major snafu here, and it actually really pisses me off. Even though I used a low-profile RAID card, and it's fully seated into the motherboard, and it's only the length of the motherboard itself, it's the same length as the ITX motherboard, I am still hitting this. So it kind of makes me upset because not many motherboards actually support 8 hard drives. In fact, I don't know of an ITX motherboard that has 8 drive ports on it. There might be a server grade one, but anyway, so I figured you had to use some kind of a RAID card. Well, you can't. It's hitting right here, and in fact, you probably could if it was one of those shorter RAID cards, but I didn't see a very quality one that could do RAID 5 and RAID 6 that was any shorter in order to not even make it to this far. I mean, you'd have to get one that is literally half the length of that particular Areca card that I have in there. So I'm actually going to have to set this thing up and take away that third caddy and only have 7 drives, which is, like I said, that really upsets me actually, because I mean I kind of wanted to be able to use the complete functionality of this case, but there's just not enough room. I think I was missing it by literally probably a half of a centimeter of being able to get this cage in there. It was just sticking out enough. So that is really unfortunate. So we're going to go ahead and I will show the removal of this bracket, and you know, like we were going to use it for a longer GPU, but you're going to have to use it for a standard sized RAID card. So let's go ahead and get on with that. Alright, so here we are with the drive cage removed there, and we're going to remove this piece and then install this piece instead. And then it turns into this. So basically there was just 5 screws, and this piece came off, that piece goes in its place, and now we are good to go. You can see how that works. Got that rubber strip there. So this is going to allow what little piece of the card was overhanging, it's going to allow it to actually just kind of fit in there. And other than losing the third drive bay, which now you can see why this piece here blocks it off, so you couldn't get anything in there. And then that's where this this cap will go in the front of the case. It'll cover that up as well too. So that'll give you an idea of how that works, whether it be a graphics card or any other card. Now we have the availability for a PCI Express card. So now you can see I've got the drive cage back in the chassis, and it fits just perfectly. We've got the 4 screws back in, and it is mounted, except for the 2 bottom I still have to mount, but we'll do that later for sure, especially when I get to the end and I realize, oh, I got some screws left over. I'll probably figure it out at that point. But anyway, one thing to point out is after this is in, you cannot put a drive in here in these 2.5-inch bracket up here. You'll have to remove this drive bracket to install one, because one simply just won't fit up in there now. But that's an easy thing to do. Obviously 4 screws, remove that like I showed before, and then you can mount the drive and then put it back in and then get it you know, connected and wired up and whatnot. So anyway, let's show the front of the case here again. If we can kind of, I don't know if it's going to show up on the camera very well, unfortunately. I'm going to try a different angle here. Okay, so I got the angle a little better anyway, and then I moved my light just a hair so we can kind of see back in there. You can see where the edge of the PCB, if I move my finger out of the light, you can see where the edge of the PCB is just resting on that bracket. So that is how that worked out for me in this particular deal. So depending, like I said, on the size of the RAID card, there's a better shot. Depending on the size of the RAID card, that one is overhanging probably, maybe I would guess, a centimeter in towards the drive cage, and maybe about a half of a centimeter this way into the drive cage. So that was my unfortunate experience there, but you know, what do you do? So we're just gonna go without having that drive bay, and then to finish that off, we just pop this. Oh, you know what? It's actually going to Well, son of a gun, it looks like it actually has to be installed from the inside. Oh man, that's no good. Oh, there we go. I might be able to, okay. There we go. It probably, oh, there we go. It probably needed to actually go on before the drive cage went in, but I was able to get it snapped into place. Definitely, I thought it would go from the outside inward, but it's going from the inside outward. So then there's how that works. So now we can go ahead and close up the lid, and let's get some the final wiring done. So here's a look at this mess. There's more that can be done here depending on how much time you want to spend. For me, I would probably still need to tie these back down away from the fan before I was satisfied, but I don't think we're going to get a perfect cable management setup in this thing. There's just too much going on. I effectively have 9 SATA cables with the one that goes up to the top here that I haven't even put a drive in yet, and I've got the 8 from here that I'm using 7. I mean, we've got these capacitors we have to be careful with without, you know, we don't want to break off. We've got the fans that I've done as best as I could. The 2 Molexes are in there. I've got the SATA power up there as well too. There is just a lot going on in this tight little area here, unfortunately. And fortunately, I mean, it's good that it is this small, because once you do get this done, and without you're never going to show it off anyway, so I mean, you can put this thing in a corner and it'll probably, as long as the fans work and you have no hardware failures, you won't even know about it. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty tough to manage those cables, which is going to make the most of those, well, the most benefit is going to come from those dust filters, is what I was trying to say, because this, with all that cable, is going to be an absolute dust nightmare. You'll never really get in there to clean it out, and to clean it out, you'd have to take everything out and everything apart, and regardless, even without the cable management, just to get in there, you're going to have to remove the drive cages at the very least. So this would be definitely a system that you wouldn't want a internal hardware failure to happen and then have to take this thing all the way apart again, because man, oh man, it's just a pain in the neck. And especially then if you tidied up all these cables and then had a hardware failure, then you're gonna have to cut all the zip ties, unloosen them all, pull it all out, and then again watching so you don't break off capacitors. This is kind of a pain in the ass NAS box is what I would call it. The only virtue of it though is, like we talked about before, is the hard drives in the front, the hot swappable hard drives. So I mean, my personal opinion, and we'll just go ahead and get right into the wrap-up, is I would probably stay with, like for example, I'm using a Fractal Design Define R4 right now for my server case or my storage case, and it can hold 8 3.5-inch hard drives, and it can have some SSDs taped and velcroed here and there and da-da-dee-da, but I would probably stick with a case like that where I don't utilize the hot swap that much, and I would appreciate the access to my hardware a little better in the event of a failure, if a RAM stick goes bad. Man, you got to take this whole damn thing apart just for a RAM stick. Yeah, I don't know that I would ever do this again. I don't. Yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate too, because when the case is all pulled apart, man, you can see the potential that goes on with this thing. It is absolutely incredible, the potential, but it's just it could be a little bigger, and I would say to come out this way a little more, and then we don't have the problem with a half-height PCI Express card, which I never would have thought would have been a problem anyway. Wow, I was totally shocked by that. And then have it extend out a little bit further this way as well too, to where you can actually, well, I mean, still though, the access to the motherboard is just going to be so difficult. Man, yep, like I said, you're just not going to want a hardware failure with this particular case. Yeah, I have a hard time recommending it unless you guys out there are kind of happy with this, because unfortunately there is stuff I can do with it, but there's just not much I can do with it. So anyway, I'm going to finish putting the case back together, and that's probably about the end of it at this video. Man, got so many, there's so many good things about this thing, and there's just so many not good things about it. I definitely, like I'll say it again, I definitely would not do this build again. But if you liked the video, even though it was at this point we're like a half an hour long, if you like it, give me the thumbs up and let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. If you like this type of video, too long, too detailed, I really would be happy to hear what you guys think about this case. And maybe I missed a few points that you think are, that you look at differently. I would like to hear your opinions as well too. That would be great. Just keep them constructive, please. And yeah, so anyway, as always, thank you guys for watching.